Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another virtual edition of Mic'd Up Sports. Now, over the last few episodes, we have been discussing George Floyd and the impact his death has had in the state of Minnesota and throughout the world. But this is a sports podcast, so I have a feeling we'll end up mixing the two subjects today with our guest, Sloane Martin of WCCO Radio. She is also the broadcaster for the Minnesota Lynx. You may have seen her on KSTC Channel 45 for state tournament broadcasts. Sloane, I have to wonder, with all the accolades you've built as a reporter and sports broadcaster, is this all part of your plan to take over the world?
Yes, actually, you caught me. You found me out. No, it just there's been a lot of opportunities since I've moved here to Minnesota, which is going on. We're really close to 4 years now. And it has just opened so many doors for me, and I've met so many great people, and the opportunities have opened up. So that's why a big reason why I love it here.
Well, one thing you and I have in common right now is that sports is still shut down. Major League Baseball, I would be working as a StatCast operator, but it looks like they're headed toward a labor dispute, and the WNBA hoping to restart in late July. But if this were a normal year, you would have been covering home and road games on top of your work. So how have the last 3 months have been without having a WNBA team and a schedule to prep for?
It's been really difficult just because basketball is my life and my passion. And last year was one of the greatest years of my life, just being able to be with the Lynx and be that voice and travel with them. I came into it not just because I love basketball and I love women's sports, but I felt like I was carrying on that legacy of Lynx Radio before me with Alan Horton and John Folke. So I felt like this is just extremely special to me and my favorite league and my favorite sport. So it's hard not to think, look at the schedule, where we would have been right now. What would the team's record be? I've seen a lot of preseason, off-season kind of predictions that have the Lynx like kind of that mid-pack and like sneaking into the playoffs again. I'd be really interested to see how this new roster looks. So I can't lie that my mind definitely goes there and thinks about how things would be right now. But it has been, the utmost importance to me with my job. I started out the first 10 weeks, my last day at actual work, the before times, was like March 12th, maybe, March 13th, whatever that Friday was. And then that's when everything really shut down. So I spent, at least 10, maybe 11 weeks working from home, barely ever leaving home, even as a reporter, because I was on the coronavirus updates every single day with the governor. And that was a huge responsibility to me because I'm listening to what officials are saying, to what experts are saying every single day, and relaying that to our listeners. And I took that as just a huge responsibility. And then, of course, George Floyd is killed, and then jumping into that scene too. So while I have had moments where I am definitely thinking about basketball and wishing we were there, it has been, a lot on my plate and a really important responsibility I feel to our listeners.
And I'm glad you brought that up because you probably have heard of the stick to sports trope that comes around whenever we get moments like George Floyd or situations like this. But for you, you really can't do that because when you're not calling games, as you noted, you are getting news reports for CCO Radio. And so you get to live both worlds in current events and news and in sports. And I have to imagine you have seen the reaction from the Lynx. And one thing I'm bummed about not having a season is, they would have jumped in with George Floyd, and they have. But what do you make of the reaction from the sports world, whether it's the Lynx and the WNBA or NASCAR banning the Confederate flag? People are taking this seriously.
Well, that's the thing, is that even though I haven't been able to witness the Lynx doing this in person, which you're right. I think that there would be a huge response and really important words that our community needs to hear from them. But I have been able to bear witness to a watershed moment in the streets in our community. So it's been a little bit different for me, kind of observing the athletes from afar through social media or through other reporters. But, my own experience has been in the streets every single day, seeing this watershed moment. And I would love to be able to, like, in person, see what Lynx would say and what they would be doing. What would happen to the season at this point, and how many teams and players would kneel. I'd be really interested to see what that looks like and how that also spurs this moment and this movement forward because of how influential. And the WNBA could have really taken a major spotlight in that, just being in season at this time and being a completely, from, in my own opinion, being completely different, culturally from Major League Baseball, where you rarely, hear players speak out. We've seen a little bit more. I mean, obviously, like the Boston Red Sox, that statement about racism and saying that that's real, that what players have experienced and been saying for a really long time. I mean, how long ago has Torrey Hunter been saying that he's experienced racism over there at Fenway Park? So I'd be really interested to see the WNBA front and center with this, with them currently playing. But you're right that they would be able to lead and really add to, and I think accelerate this same kind of momentum.
And the response and the stance from the WNBA, different tone than even 4 years ago. I remember writing a series of stories when the Lynx chose to honor Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, and 5 Dallas police officers who were killed in an ambush attack. And back then, the league really wasn't sure how to handle it. They tried to put a clamp on it, and then players revolted by doing media blackouts, and the league eventually relented. Now they're embracing this push for justice with more open arms. What do you think is causing the change in tone, where leagues were more apprehensive, even just 4 years ago, to openly embracing this subject?
That's a really good question. And I know what I hear from protesters, I'm speaking to them nearly every single day for about 3 weeks now, is that there was, I think, just how inhumane George Floyd's death was, how shocking that video is a huge part in why we are where we are, where it was just this slap in the face to what Black people have been saying their entire lives. And so there's no denying racism. There never has been. There's no denying, that, police brutality and the differences we see between Black and white communities in terms of policing. And that has been just completely laid bare. Like, there was no excuses. There was nothing people could say, in terms of coming up with some kind of excuse or defense of the action of former officer Derek Chauvin. So I think that played a big part in it, and getting these other leagues like NASCAR or even Major League Baseball, who are normally just extremely cautious, not typically known for social justice initiatives and, supporting. But I think you're right that the WNBA has come a really long way, and that's because of the players who said, you're listening to us, we're this league, and you don't have a WNBA without us, and we are leading this conversation and using our voices. So I give them a lot of credit for infiltrating just sports in general. I think other teams have to follow the lead of sports like this and athletes like WNBA players to be able to kind of swing that pendulum. And it took time, and it took inch by inch in this battle with WNBA players using their voice to maybe get some more, players, leagues, teams behind that same message. But you're right that it has been this moment. And that's what's so tough too. And another thing I hear from so many protesters is, what about all of those other deaths? And that's why so many events that I go to are really recognizing all the other victims of, police shootings or police killings too. So I think that's really important to keep in mind and to look back and to reflect on how things have changed in these 4 years.
And as you've noted, the intensity has simmered compared to the first week when we had protests and riots for a couple of days. But being on this beat now for 3 weeks, what have you taken away from your interviews with protesters, your opportunities to witness these gatherings, whether it's at 38th in Chicago or the state capitol or wherever you're assigned? What do you make of this massive response?
I mean, that this is a watershed moment and that truly it is not going to be subsiding for a very long time. And it's one of those situations where it really does support the mission of people like Colin Kaepernick and Maya Moore, who have taken drastic measures, in their careers in order to fight for social justice. And I think other athletes are looking at them. And I think this conversation is happening in the NBA, where what can we do more to kind of see what those players are doing, and what should we be doing as a whole, kind of resembling in the footsteps of Kaepernick and Maya. So I think for me, it's I don't expect this to go away anytime soon, nor should it, because there's still a long way to go to see the kind of reforms that protesters are calling for. We already see those wheels in motion here in Minneapolis. St. Paul has not been the same way. Their city council is not considering at this moment, disbanding police. So I wonder if attention will focus to over there too, because I certainly know there is a lot of criticism and derision directed at the St. Paul Police Department from protesters I've heard from. But I think they see these wheels in motion, but it is not enough. That the only thing that will be, obviously it's justice for George Floyd and seeing convictions for those 4 officers, but it is also seeing through the entire process to have a new model for public safety. Has a lot of support at protests that I'm going to. So it's not just enough to have gotten their attention. It's not just enough to have initiated things. It is continuing to apply pressure to get the reforms that need to happen.
And you spoke of what other leagues are doing, and I'm already seeing what could be a watershed moment. Yesterday, NASCAR held a race at Homestead, Miami, and they're getting some new crossover appeal. Alvin Kamara attended the race to support Bubba Wallace, who, as you may know, sported the Black Lives Matter paint scheme on his number 43 car. And Renee Montgomery, a former Lynx player, now with Atlanta, saw what NASCAR did and said, I'm going to watch the next race. You may have seen NASCAR fans helping her get up to speed on social media. And I know it's just a small part in this overall discussion, but do you think this could lead to more crossover advocacy and awareness with athletes of color?
Well, this is why it's something I harp on so much, whether it's sports or literally any other venture, any other facet of society, is how much representation matters and how easy it is to just be inclusive by just saying the words, just as a fact, Black Lives Matter. How that opens up so many people because they feel welcome and included. And when you have Confederate flags going at your sporting events, how many people it's going to turn away? So I think that it's a really good example of being able to welcome different people in. And maybe you're seeing this same kind of reckoning within the NHL and hockey as well, where Black players are speaking up about terrible experiences they've had, the racism that they've experienced, and maybe having this face-to-face confrontation with the ugliness of sport in some cases can really initiate that change, and fans are going to be paying attention and they're going to want to jump in because maybe they've always been interested in NASCAR but never felt that pull because they didn't think that they would ever feel welcome or comfortable there. So when you take away those barriers purely just based on something as simple as, that factual statement, Black Lives Matter, can welcome people in. And I'm sure maybe leagues, I don't want to be cynical, but I'm sure leagues are thinking that there's got to be, a financial benefit to that too. Like, boy, that's that's all we had to do to get more interest in our league during a pandemic. Now, why didn't we do that a long time ago? But I think that can only be really positive when people just feel respected in any kind of sport community.
And extending that point, the same can be said with media and sports as well. People have often said, or critics or cynics or what have you, always wondering how profitable or marketable it would be to feature, a league full of women like the WNBA. Or I remember when Black Panther came out a few years ago, and Hunger Games as well, there was some apprehension wondering how successful they could be without your typical driving force. You put it out there, and as you noted too, with NASCAR getting rid of the Confederate flag, I thought it should have been done years ago. But you make these changes, and I think it's surprising and refreshing to see that people respond to it.
I think it's also just refreshing to see that kind of change is possible. That even though it took an extremely long time, I mean, talking about the Confederate flag in 2020 is mind-boggling. But so to get to this point where finally it's done away with, and to focus on those new fans coming in, I mean, that's got to be really exciting for leagues and organizations like NASCAR to be able to bring people in. And I think that is because you are just seeing that different kind of environment. Like you said, I think it opens the floodgates maybe once they see those positive results.
Now, a few minutes ago, you mentioned the WNBA, women's basketball, being your favorite sport. And I know you were a player before you became a broadcaster. So when you were growing up, I believe you came to us by way of LA with a stop in Buffalo and Rochester, that area. Did you have any aspirations of becoming a WNBA player, or what did you see yourself when you were making your way up the ranks as an athlete?
I laugh at that because the answer is a hard no. I had no expectation of ever being a professional player. I thought I had daydreams that if I was 6'4", maybe I'd be able to latch onto a D1 team somewhere. But everything worked out fine. I played Division III basketball in Rochester, New York, and it was funny because in D3 they stack games, women and then men, the same night. So I would play in a game, not even shower, take off, change my clothes. And then I would come out and I would do color for the men's game. And then I started doing play-by-play, and that's, at a really small college, how I was able to just get reps and get more comfortable with calling games. And I would do football and basketball throughout the year. So no, definitely no expectations of moving that even farther. For me, it was just, even being at that level, Division III, it was still such a part of my identity. And that's why I'm so happy to, be working on a career in basketball too, because it still feels that way. It still feels like this attachment that I want to always have alongside me.
And something I was curious when I learned about your background, as you know, a lot of former basketball players end up as analysts. Not many get the opportunity to do play-by-play like you did. Now, being at a D3 school might have helped because you don't get the same spotlight as, say, South Carolina or UConn. Of course, you're still a college athlete. But was there any, I don't want to say pushback, but what led you to go into play-by-play, and what does it mean for you to get that role as a former player as opposed to being another analyst?
Oh, that's a good question. I just feel I was drawn to sports broadcasting in general by people like Michelle Tafoya and Susie Colbert. And the reason for that was because of how authoritative they were, that when they would speak, you listen. And that what you're getting from them is informed and it's substantive. So I wanted to model myself after them to be people who were just authorities. And then when they stood in front of the camera and when they had a mic in front of them, you wanted to listen to what they had to say. So I guess I think back, maybe I was thinking about sideline, but being at a small college, we didn't really ever have one with our webcasts. It's kind of like additional technical stuff you need, more people that you need. We had a pretty like bare bones production. And so it just kind of turned into play-by-play because I wanted to be able to be the person who was navigating and narrating this entire thing. And it's very much a back and forth and an equal partnership, but I still feel like it's that responsibility to guide this. You have this responsibility to the audience and to the listeners to tell the story and narrate what's happening in this game. And, you know, bringing in that color analyst so you get the most out of them. So I like that responsibility. Maybe I'm a little bit, I like to be like in charge of things. I will not deny that that's a part of it, but, you know, also just kind of being like, maybe this is a lame cliche, but just kind of like the captain of the broadcast in a way. So I liked having that responsibility and having that be in my hands. And I like feeling that kind of pressure to do the best that we can for our listeners. And it just clicked really well. Started out doing football and obviously basketball too. And then it's just expanded from there. Did a little bit of baseball and obviously hockey currently.
Do you recall the first play-by-play assignment you had? How many butterflies, how thrilling, exciting it was, and what you took away from that first assignment?
You know, it's tough because that definitely goes pretty early on. I mean, I definitely was at least getting like paying gigs within college, not very much, of course. But I definitely felt less comfortable doing like TV work. I just felt like the timing, the connection with the camera, it was just a little bit foreign to me. Like really, because in radio, a lot of times it's like you're working with a producer and you do have a time and clock, but I think that there is kind of more freedom within that. Whereas TV, everything is like really laid out in terms of a rundown and agenda. So that was a transition for me to get used to. Maybe to me, a little bit more of the formality with it. I would say probably the first time I felt that I would have still been in college, and I was doing it was a football playoff game, and this was at Ralph Wilson Stadium in Orchard Park. And I remember, like, you know, sometimes people like they hold stress differently. Some people it's in their neck, some people it's in their like gastrointestinal system. I am the latter. And I just remember feeling like I feel like I can't stand. Like my stomach hurts so much. I felt like I was just like doubled over, just big ball of stress. And then it was like, as soon as it was time to go, I was totally fine. And that's how I learned. That was a good early lesson for trusting myself and believing in myself. And I still hold on to that energy, but it is so drastically different. It's gone from total nerves and anxiety to like excitement and like more positive for sure. But that took a really long time to get to that point, Mike. Like I was usually a big ball of nerves because I set the bar really high and I want to do extremely well every single time, I'm called on.
I can relate to that. And I remember something LaChina Robinson said that kind of hit it on the head for me and perhaps you too. For folks like ourselves, most of my experiences at the high school level, I've done some semi-pro women's football and some small college gigs, but no matter the assignment, you always feel like you want to give your 100% best performance. And that's not always possible, but it can be daunting, the pressure we put on ourselves sometimes because people are watching us. We want to make a good impression. You never know when a talent scout might be watching, give you a call and say, hey, I'd like you to join our team. How do you balance that as you've gotten older and wiser and more experienced? How have you been able to keep that from turning you into this giant ball of gastrointestinal nerves that where you want to double over?
Yeah, exactly. Luckily, I don't find myself in that condition anymore, but I do still it's a really good point. And I think what got me there is realizing and coming to terms with that I don't think a perfect broadcast exists. for anyone. I mean, whether you're Jim Nance or Joe Buck or anyone, that there's always something you maybe look back on and say, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had seen this coming better, or I wish I had used this specific word in this case. And I just accepted that that's what happens, that at least for myself and the expectations that I have, it's never going to be perfect, but I can still be really damn proud of what I do. And the other way I get around that too is by trusting the work that I put in. I am obsessive about my preparation. I try to have as much in, again, part of that is that I try to have as much in my head as opposed to on my notes as possible. So I'm not looking down as much, that I can be so focused on the game in front of me that I am not distracted looking for something or wondering, did I see that? I mean, it is like studying for a final every single game. And whether that's the WNBA regular season or playoffs, anything like that, it always is that way to me. And then I think I also, you know, my background in journalism really helps with that too, because I also think with that, you can always feel like I should have done more. I should have talked to one extra person. I should have gone, to this place. I should have done that one extra step. Even if I feel like I did so much hard work, my brain works that way. So whether it is, you know, something I'm covering journalistically from a news standpoint or doing a game, it's accepting that I put the work in and I worked hard and I trust that I worked hard every single time. So that is what I can take out of this. And that's how I can keep doing this as opposed to just, really railing on myself a lot.
What you said about preparation and getting it all in your head, that's something I try to do even with the high school games. And as you know, for high school, especially regular season, it's harder to get all that information. You don't have SIDs, and sometimes you don't even get full stats. So you have to do
I've
a little
had
more
games.
digging.
I mean, I've seen rosters with like 2 of the same numbers on it. And I think we all have stories like that.
Well, what I was getting at is I'll have a cheat sheet. So I'll look up, okay, key players, what are some of their key moments or key games? But my colleagues that I bring in always remark at how much knowledge I retain in my head, and I can just spew it out without hesitating. And it goes to what you said. I figured the more I can get into my head, and it's not foolproof. There are going to be moments where you might have a lapse, but then the easier it is for me to follow along. And when you do something for high school games, I've done it for 14 years, so I have a lot of background information. And with you being a WNBA fan, I have to imagine when you get the chance to call Lynx games, even though you're what would have been your second season in, all of that work you did with the Athletic or CCO Radio and just being a fan, I imagine helped prepare you for the games that you're calling online and on radio.
That's what makes it like the easiest job I've ever had, is because I know every single player in this league, every single one, like their face, their story, their college, their draft stat, like everything. So it's not that I still put in the work every single time, and I read. That's what's so nice to see, just so many other growing number of news outlets that really cover the WNBA and women's sports so well. So there's always things to update throughout the season. And of course, updating stats and really following along the storylines of the season. But to be honest, with WNBA games, I'm not out here like memorizing numbers, because I know what everyone looks like. And it was funny to hear, sometimes other broadcasters would be upset that they took the numbers off the front of the jerseys. And yes, that can be tough when, fouls are called, for example. But it was like, I just know every single player because I've been following women's college basketball and the WNBA like really my whole life. So it made it easier, I should say, because, sometimes when I'm doing like Big Ten Network, for example, it really, like, I know the Big Ten really well, but you're still learning, who's that 12th player on the roster and what's her story? What can I say in case she comes into the game? Whereas in the WNBA, it's just so ingrained. Like you said, like with you in high school, like having that experience, it makes like such a huge difference.
That being said, I wouldn't mind if they put the numbers back on front of the jerseys because I still watch the
Yeah.
games. And
Yeah.
like you said, it'd be a little easier for fouls, or sometimes I know, well, where you're stationed in front row, players can obscure each other. And
Yeah.
it's a minor thing because, as you said, you've followed the sport for so long, you know faces and names, and it's just second nature to you. But
Yeah.
baby steps.
Yeah. Maybe they'll come back. I'm not sure, because then also, you know, some broadcasters will say like, well, then their hair covers up the one number I can see. So, I mean, I can like really calling fouls is probably the most challenging. And that's when I do have to like, you know, make sure again, but you know, it's a great advantage to have when I was just able to jump in here.
No, I'm not going to ask you for your favorite game because you've called so many that I think it'd be tough. But what are some games or moments that you've been able to call as a broadcaster where you look back on your career and just think, I was glad I got to be a part of it?
Oh gosh, there are so many of them, and that makes me really happy because not every game is going to be great or transcendent or even really, I mean, it's always going to be fun, but sometimes the fun is, you know, there's going to be different levels of that. But I would say maybe number one. I shouldn't say maybe number one. It's definitely number one, and then everything else is two and beyond. Would be the MAC tournament for the University at Buffalo. You can see got a jersey from that team. They all signed it because that was the University at Buffalo, and doing the MAC was my first real, like, to me it felt like my first real major gig. Like, I'm a Division I broadcaster, and you know, in a, you know, pretty major media market, and fell in love with the MAC. Still have so much love for Maction as well. And it would have been my final season, which would have been 15-16, and they went to the MAC tournament. They made it to the championship game, and they won and went to the NCAA championship, or sorry, the NCAA tournament for the first time in UB's history. And it came off a buzzer beater. And Mike, it was so fun to look back on. And I loved my call because at one point during the season, they had been in 8th place and then ended up MAC postseason champions. So I think my call was from 8th place to history. Buffalo's going to the NCAA tournament. It was something like that, where, and a huge crowd came because both the men and women, this was in Cleveland, so not that far of a drive from Buffalo. And so there was a lot of fans, a lot of UB fans there, a lot of blue and white. And so the crowd went crazy. And I wasn't expecting this, but I felt like this just flood of emotion like I've never had. Like I was almost overcome. And I try and separate myself. You know, it's not like it's a little bit of a different dynamic. I'm not the media. I work for the team. I travel with the team. But I also always want to make sure that there is, you know, that, like, especially when it's college kids, like I'm, you know, an adult employee here, not trying to like be their pal, even though we can obviously be really friendly, and they were all extremely great to work with and have really fond memories there. But I wasn't feeling like this flood of emotion while being on air. And yeah, I never expected that to happen. And I remember that so fondly. And my husband came out and surprised me, didn't know he was coming. And he, just because there was some space inside Quicken Loans Arena, he was sitting like just a couple of seats away from me. So it felt like we were kind of sharing that moment too, while he's hearing me and seeing what's happening. And he knew the team really well. He knows the WNBA and women's college basketball. It's been something we've really shared for, you know, over a dozen years together. And, so to share that moment was really special, and you don't always get that kind of connection, that big moment. Plus, I was just rooting for them so hard. I mean, the MAC has always been really difficult. I mean, for the long time, Bowling Green really dominated that conference, and it was not. We've seen it the last couple of years, but at that point, it was not a 2-team seed basically in the MAC. So winning the postseason tournament, and that's why I will always love, and this is nothing against, the Big Ten tournament or Pac-12 tournament, but when it is do or die to get into the NCAA tournament, those are the postseason tournaments that I think are so fun to watch. And that's what I saw right there. And it was players who I saw in person because I'd be able to see them practice, who just worked so hard collectively to see what it took firsthand to be a Division I athlete, even in the MAC. Just had so much respect for them. So it was like kind of all these emotions, loving the people who I work with and really loving this job. It totally flooded me and I didn't see it happening. So definitely that one I would say is far and away number one.
Well, I hope your buddies at Big Ten Network don't hold a grudge about that because you've been calling those games out the last couple of years.
No, I love the Big Ten. I love the Big Ten now, or the Big Ten tournament too, because you still are, even though like teams are still going in with that expectation that they're, probably going to get an at-large bid. It still is seeing the biggest performances. Like seeing Maryland win last year. I mean, that was a really great team to watch.
And Buffalo, I think Felicia Liggett-Jack, the head coach of that team, right? And if I recall,
Felicia Liggett-Jack, yeah.
Liggett. And if I recall, was that the team or did it come later where they got to the Sweet 16? It was,
yes,
there was a Cinderella run.
That was Sierra Dillard's last year, her senior year. So she was actually drafted by the Lynx, if you remember, in 2019. So it would have been 18-19. They went to the Sweet 16. And I still keep up with them and still talk with them. I actually ran into Coach Jack just randomly on a street in Chicago. The Lynx were playing the Sky during that huge weekend of AAU tournaments in Chicago and just saw each other on the sidewalk. And so I've always been keeping up with them, but that was a magical season for them. I was losing it.
Yes, and when it's safe, that's what really has been fun to watch with the college game. I don't get to follow it as much as I like because I'm covering the high school circuit and there's a lot of overlap, but the parity we're seeing now is just amazing. So I can't wait to see who the next Buffalo is going to be or all these other teams where in the women's game, it was the big dogs and it was hard for the little ones to make their way through. And more we're seeing some of these mid-majors make a run.
Yeah, and I think that's excellent to see. We know it here in the Twin Cities kind of being close to South Dakota State and South Dakota, and then right south of us is teams like Drake, for example. Those are the big ones that really come to mind. Green Bay also historically. So it's interesting to see, so much representation in the Midwest in terms of those teams that are really solid even at the mid-major level. But I'd be interested to, because I can only speak from my experience with Buffalo, and I know that you just have a rock solid coach, someone who's had, a lot of success and a lot of experience, who also brings in, that family kind of vibe and who truly cares for their athletes. I mean, that's a huge draw that goes beyond a name of a college. If you remember, Mike, Hannah Hall, their point guard, went viral when she shared her story about eating disorder and mental illness. And it was led by Coach Jack, who wanted her to get help and to slow down and to address herself. And those are the kinds of things that I think sets programs apart. Again, I can't speak for all of them, but there's obviously got to be draws there besides maybe geographic that go beyond those names that people are maybe most drawn to in women's basketball.
And on a related note, on a personal level, I did find it a little surreal because I've watched some of your broadcasts when I get the chance to, when you were calling Minnesota games this past season for Big Ten Network, and I'm hearing Sarah Scalia's name, an athlete I had called for a couple of years at Stillwater. And I don't know if you feel this way when you're watching games from other broadcasts, but sometimes in my head, I'm going, how would I approach this? And I don't know if you go through that or if you're able to put that aside and just be a fan when you're not on duty.
You know what? That's a good question. I think that I am mostly like a fan. There's definitely times where my ears perk up. I'm still listening, and trying to, I think always, improve. Certainly when I hear certain like words, I'm like, "Oh, I gotta remember that. You know what I mean? Like, why haven't I been saying this? But also seeing how people interact. I really like watching, because I think it's always a process, and I think that I've gotten a lot better at just finding my voice and on-air personality, but I think that it can still continue to evolve the more, comfortable and confident you get. And I think that that's going to be a long journey. There's no just one day you just realize like, well, I'm the best broadcaster I can be, and that's who I am. So that's why it continues to be, this to me a lifelong process, because I don't plan on stepping away anytime soon, or really anytime period if I'm lucky enough. So that's the way I look at it, and I like seeing just different kinds of styles. And but yeah, definitely I take relaxing when it comes to watching sports seriously.
Now, how surreal was it to get the offer to be the Minnesota Lynx team broadcaster, because you had covered them through CCO Radio, through a year at The Athletic, and you and I know it's a business, so sometimes the teams you cover may end up being the team that hires you. But when you got word, I'm not sure how you were approached, what went through your mind after covering this team as a neutral figure, a reporter that doesn't have a stake in it the way you would as a broadcaster? What did you make of that moment?
Well, I had always, kind of followed and been impressed with the Lynx, even before I ever knew I would end up in Minnesota. I mean, obviously, so I moved here in 2016, so there was plenty of, experience. Not that I'm like a bandwagoner or anything, but there was a lot to like about this franchise. I mean, like Sylvia Fowles and Rebecca Brunson, just being a former post player, I gravitated to them. But like even Maya Moore, I went to, I was living and going to school in Rochester, and my spouse and I drove to to Syracuse back in the old Big East days, to see her and Tina Charles play against the Orange. So had a long history there, and obviously really respected them, but also noticed the commitment that exists that I don't think is matched by very many teams, just in terms of the investment in the Lynx. So that was really apparent to me even before Minnesota was on my radar. And then also being around the team, knowing people, enjoying the people who are around the team themselves, feeling really comfortable and happy with the work that I did. Because a lot of it was, really long form features. So I got to like really dive in deep to so many players and, talk to people from their past or their backgrounds, their hometowns. And that just like really ingrained me more into everything Minnesota Lynx. And I still remember, I got a phone call. I was at a gas station. I was in my news truck, at work. I was filling up the gas tank, and that's when I got the phone call, and I just like froze, because it really is like dream job status to me, quite honestly, because of the respect that I have for women's sports. To me, it's not a stepping stone. It is not a means to an end. That is a job in men's sports and never will be. It is, if my entire career is women's sports, that will be just a huge blessing and victory. So when I had that phone call, I just like froze and then immediately called my spouse and said, oh my gosh, I have this meeting and I can't believe it. And it was like something you just don't often feel. I just froze, and it was like excitement everywhere for sure.
So that would have been a good time to drive by you in the lane then, if you froze up like that, or did that not happen on the basketball court?
Oh, no, it didn't. I was mostly like, me on the basketball court was picking up too many fouls, being too aggressive, probably too physical, but I will take it. I will take that reputation.
Badge of honor, right? So if you got a bruise, that was a battle scar.
Oh yeah, I actually, this is like not a great story to brag about, but I did accidentally give someone a bloody nose once. I love the pick and roll as a fan, love it as a player too, to like pick and pop, pick and slip. I was like actually pretty mobile when it comes to that. Like my range was probably like 15 feet in. My feet go behind the 3-point line and I like forget how to shoot. But I was like rolling off of the screen. I was like calling for the ball like this. My elbow went back and someone's face was there. So not a badge of honor, just a small tidbit of story.
No, I don't think you would consider a badge of honor giving someone a bloody nose.
It's just illustrative, I think, of, Sloane as basketball player. Yeah.
Wow. So, oh man, this opens up so many new things. So the stretch. So you were a player. I take it this was before the stretch 4. So if you were a player now, you probably would know how to shoot like Brunson did, or some of the others behind 3-point range, Parker and Agumake too.
Yeah, it was like not a time of unicorns. I mean, I graduated high school in 2007. I'm actually only a couple days younger than Maya Moore. Share a birthday with Pat Summitt just yesterday. And so there just wasn't a time where you saw those kinds of unicorns. Now, Elena Delle Donne, I remember watching her when I was in high school. She was 1 year, 2 years younger than me, and being like, okay, well, I can't remember the names of the publications, but I would have these girls basketball magazines like sent to my house. And they also got Slam, which, didn't always feature women on the cover, but I think still covered them enough. And I remember learning about her. Jackie Gamelos was also, in my grade too. She was someone I was really aware of. And this is like before like hardcore like internet, there wasn't a whole lot of coverage and stuff happening of girls basketball. So those were some people that I remember watching. But yeah, it was like, a stretch 4, maybe a stretch 5 was definitely more like it.
Oh, and you mentioned Slam, and I remember all the hoopla when Paige Beckers made the cover.
First I have it.
Girls, you have it
right up here. Yeah, you can't really see it, but yeah, I got the cover.
We'll trust that it's there. And the internet, of course, Instagram and all the people with cell phones, that's what impressed me the most when I would cover Hopkins games this past year, or all the people waiting to post on Overtime or social media channels. But when you mention how you don't see women's sports as a stepping stone, I remember on my YouTube channel going through my analytics, and the first time I realized that women's basketball was my most watched sport, I froze like you did, because I've covered some big names on the men's side on the prep circuit, Jalen Suggs and Trey Holloman and Chet Holmgren. But my audience can't seem to get enough of Paige Beckers or Sarah Scalia. She was huge in Stillwater, and I think when she committed to Minnesota, that upped her profile. Adalia McKenzie. These are names you'll probably hear about. Well, McKenzie, because she's going to Illinois. So giving you a little primer for some of the names you're going to hear about the next couple of years.
I'm well aware. Already ready.
So what do you make of women's sports? It's not yet at the same platform as the men, but when you see Paige on the cover of Slam, or hear that women's basketball, in my case, is the most watched sport, or how you became such a fan of it, what does that say about the devotion people commit to women's athletics?
I think it's that this hunger has always been there. And now it's like, finally, we're being given something. And then that just like feeds that desire and that yearning for more information that much more. I also think that players are just even getting better. And that's what we want to see, right? We want to see who's going to be the next Maya or the next Diana Taurasi, even though there probably isn't a next, despite the comparisons with Paige Beckers. But the next player who's going to be transcendent after Elena Deladon and Brianna Stewart and looking ahead to that. I think players are getting better. I mean, look at AZ Fudd. She's someone who I think has a really bright future ahead of her, and so many more. So I think that there is this hunger to see players. You're also just seeing them more. It isn't just grainy AAU video. It is players showing off their skills. There's players who are showing off like their personalities too, which I think feeds that desire for connection and following along with their stories so much. So much of it is not just their own produced social media. It's also just there being more media in general to be able to share their stories. And I think that desire and that market has always been there. And it's like we're finally now increasing it because people have the hunger. So I love seeing, these young Gen Zers who are embracing social media, but also just like really, amazing players in their own right too. But I'm glad to hear that those, videos do well for you. And I am admittedly, I'm just like a don't read the comments, don't read the replies kind of person. I just really try and shield myself from that, because that's like question number one when I meet people is like how you feel about women's basketball. And then that gives me a real good indication of if things are moving forward or not. Because there's, I'm not super familiar with it, but like if you're a basketball fan, there's no excuse anymore to not know more than like 4 names in the WNBA. So I judge that too. Not that I'm always judgmental, but just about this in women's basketball. But the time has come where it's like, if you're a basketball fan and you're not following this, what are you doing? That tells me that you're not a basketball fan. You are just a men's basketball fan, and you are willingly choosing to not follow really great basketball. But if you're a basketball fan, why would you not want to watch really great basketball? So I think that there has been, at least for me personally, like there's that closer connection. It's gone from just like, oh, well, I guess they just are busy in the summer. Maybe they're a baseball fan too. They don't follow WNBA, to now where it's more dubious. Like, if you're not paying attention to this, what are you doing?
Right. And there are great stories on the women's circuit, as you and I can attest to from our coverage. And if that's what the demand is, I'll just keep doing it. I remember someone asking me why you cover so many women's games. And I tell you, well, look at the data. This is what people want. And it's an old cliche, I think, from a James Bond movie, but the first rule of mass media, give the people what they want. And I'm happy to do it. And I think, I don't know what your following is like, but with women's basketball working as hard as it is to get the same recognition as all the men's sports leagues, when people like ourselves, I guess I'm giving ourselves a plug if you don't mind, but when we go out there and devote our time into covering women's sports when it's still developing, I've got a feeling word gets out, and maybe that's why I'm getting a following. And I have to imagine that's why, you got a lot of publicity when you were announced as the first female Lynx broadcaster.
Yeah, for sure. It is, you just see this, concentration of people who are invested in this sport. But I do think, like, yes, it's still developing, but I think it also is moving beyond just niche. Like I said, with that example of basketball fans who, if they aren't already moving over into this league, then they should be. And there should be pressure for them to know more than just a handful of players in the WNBA. So I think that it comes from that, just expanding. And, it also has to come from really prominent voices. That's why, I know that there's a lot of debate, like when an NBA player, really puts themselves behind the WNBA, and well, they didn't need the approval of this player. They're already fantastic. And that's completely true. I mean, the Mystics are amazing, whether or not John Wall and Bradley Beal are there. But I think also their presence, again, with that representation, they're there, they're having fun, they're invested, they're rooting. Seeing that from other NBA players, I think can only be a positive thing. Because I just hope that seeing these really respected NBA players being there at WNBA games just normalizes it. just makes it normal for, not young men, not even dads. Here's the thing, you can be a dad, not be a dad, and still really enjoy the WNBA, just going with your friends like any other, game you would go to. So I think, and at least I feel like there is a transition to that as well that I think can only be really positive.
So how long did it take for you to unfreeze after you got the call from the Lynx who wanted to hire you as their broadcaster?
Oh, I mean, it was that phone call and then the call to my spouse, and then I had to go back to work, So it was like, I can't be out sneaking or I can't just go MIA from work. So I was like, all right, gotta jump back in. Cause what happens is that I'm filling up the gas tank because I just came back from a story and I have to go back and work on it. So I just jumped right in, and then you have to keep your lips closed until things become official. And, I still had a meeting coming up. I didn't know how many people were being considered. And so I kind of had to jump back into things. Just, I don't even remember what story I was working on. For some reason, maybe was coming back from St. Paul, but honestly could not tell you.
And then, of course, you got more exposure, more headlines, if you will, when you called the state hockey tournament for its 75th anniversary, and your voice also part of the Prep Bowl. And I remember you've been quoted as saying you hope it gets to a point where it's not a big deal that women like yourself get these opportunities. But how did that come about? And for you, how exciting was it knowing that there's not a lot of precedent for women calling hockey and football?
I give all credit to Dennis Silva, who's the executive director of the broadcast over at Hubbard Broadcasting, because he was the one when I moved here. I left my UB job, which, as you've heard, meant a whole lot to me to come here to Minnesota for my spouse's job. Had nothing, and he was the first person to just believe in me, give me a gig. The thing, it happened so fast moving over here to Minnesota. I mean, basically it was like he got the job offer and 2 weeks later we were here. So I didn't have a prepared reel. I was thinking about staying with UB for a really long time and being in Buffalo. Things were going well. And then this just popped up. So I'm sending him I'm sorry, I don't really have a reel, but here's part of the game and here's another part of the game. And, he really gave me that chance. And there was a thing too, where I could have said I'll take anything, but I said, I had no job. We were on one income. And I said, I'm a play-by-play broadcaster. And that's what I do, and it's nothing against sideline. I actually think it's harder than play-by-play to really say something substantive every single time the camera's on you and really be that reporter. I also think it's really hard to watch games, especially football, from the sideline too. But I said, I'm a play-by-play broadcaster, and he didn't challenge that. He didn't try and, put me into a different category or pigeonhole me. And it just kind of worked from there. And, that's just such a great group and a great community that I was able to latch on to really early, a ton of supportive people, including my current coworker in Dave Lee, who's our morning show host on WCCO. So it just kind of started with that. And just hockey, boys hockey came around because I was already doing, girls hockey, half the tournament alongside Dan Terhar. And it was we got the 75th anniversary. Let's bring in a little bit of a different flavor here. So we had a ton of different names come back in, a lot of familiar names from the past. And then I was kind of just a different flavor as well. So it was amazing working alongside Mark Parrish, who made me feel so comfortable, because it's so much different too. It was my first time calling hockey from way up in the XL Energy Center press box that's at the roof of the whole thing. So it's a totally different angle than what I get for the girls tournament, which we are down at the concourse level to just be right there, right in with the fans. So he made that transition really easy, and it was fun. You mentioned the word exciting, and certainly it was, to be able to be a part of something that is so part of Minnesota's culture. But I also think 75 years is a long, long time. And I also think about how there's a 50-year difference between the boys tournament and the girls tournament. And I think about where the girls talent is right now, which is off the charts amazing. So I think doing those games made me reflect on those sorts of things, kind of where we are, you know, with women in broadcasting, where we are with even girls sports as well. You know, how late it was for, you know, Minnesota girls hockey to really get up and running with that infrastructure that we know right now. And I mean, just think about those early names, you know, and getting to know them too as part of, you know, my broadcasting duties has been great. So exciting for sure, but also I think that it should really make people want to accelerate this.
And you spoke of the difference between boys and girls hockey, and it reminded me of the first time I covered a girls hockey game. Now, hockey is not my strongest sport as far as broadcasting goes. I gravitated more toward basketball, but I know there's a hockey culture, and I respect that because it's a lot of fun. I've gotten to see the White Bear Lake Hill Murray rivalry, for example, including a section final, and you just can't replicate that atmosphere anywhere. But I think it was Hill Murray, Eden Prairie, if I remember. And before then, I guess I wasn't that enthusiastic about it. And of course, there's no checking involved, but you see how intense, how physical, and just how athletic some of those top teams are. And that changed my mind. And likewise, women's basketball, I was indifferent. I've admitted that a few times on this podcast, but I don't mind saying it because, yeah, that's how sports grow. And it was Lindsay Whalen and the Gophers' Final Four run. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but Don Shelby, big supporter of the women's team, even back in the 90s before they became household names. And I just remember thinking to myself, if a guy like Don Shelby can get behind this team, I guess I can too. So I'm glad that even if I'm a latecomer by some standards, that I was able to join the party.
Yeah, and I hope that more people have that kind of realization that it's not other, it is not different, it is the best kind of sports you are seeing. And of course that, I mean, that applies to everything, but I think about it with girls hockey too. When I first saw my first game, and it was a sectional game between Blake and Breck, you know, being in the
Two of the
same
Blue
section
Bloods.
is, yep, it's always really tough. So in that game, I'm seeing Madeline Wethington, who's a current Gopher, and Grace Zumwinkle. And I remember just my mind was blown because I had never seen hockey this good, period. So that was a really great introduction to Minnesota girls hockey. And, you know, just like you're saying, I hope that people, it comes down to exposure. That's really all it takes, is being able to just go and see, and then you analyze and you learn more about players' backgrounds, and then it just becomes you know, second nature to you. And I wish more people would be able to just take that first step to make the transition. You know, for me, have always my entire life, you know, been a huge women's sports fan, so it wasn't a transition for me. But imagine if there was anyone else who sat in the rink for that Blake Breck game, and how that might have really changed things for them in the years to come.
And that's something I think about, and that's why when I call games, I try to make it like the biggest game I've ever seen, even if the matchup isn't the greatest on paper, if it looks like a lopsided matchup, or if it's, you know, maybe a couple under the radar teams. I've done that too. But I remember having a PA announcer on last year, and he had said for a lot of these athletes at the smaller levels, whether it's high school or college, most of them, 95%, I don't know if that's the right estimate, but that's going to be the pinnacle of their athletic career. A few will go pro, and we have, of course, the Whitecaps now, or the WNBA, but most will stop after the high school or college ranks. And I feel like it's my duty to give them the feel as if they were on ESPN, because as you said, who knows if another broadcaster was in that place, how he or she would have approached it. For you, it sounded like there was that fan inside of you just caught up in this great battle of Blake and Breck. And I'm sure you could say that with all of the matchups you've been able to witness. So I'm glad you take that approach, because for those top tier players, and even for those who are just doing it for fun or have other plans, they're going to remember just how enthusiastic you were to see that huge section final breakout.
And that's the thing. And that's what, I always think you're going to get with me is genuine enthusiasm and excitement and making this special. And that's why I always love doing, those high school championship games. It's not just, that last hurrah for them. But it is also realizing and putting yourself in those shoes of how special this kind of environment is, how special this game is, not just for themselves as individuals or even as a team, but for the entire community. So that is something that has always been, utmost importance to me.
Now, you spoke of transitions. How did you end up at Big Ten Network with, I imagine the offseason plays a part in that with the WNBA, but you already had built up a pretty impressive resume, and now here you are getting a chance to travel and call Big Ten women's games.
Yeah, it's just a matter of putting yourself out there. And I think that that's one of the hardest things, because I thought, well, if I was really good enough, wouldn't they be coming to me? And the answer is no. That's not reality for anyone. You have to just have that confidence to put yourself out there. And I'm still on that journey of, approaching people and believing in yourself enough that someone will see your tape and want to hire you. But that's really all it took, was just reaching out and being confident enough in my tape and the work that I've done, my resume and who I am as a broadcaster, that it would carry and it would be convincing. And they've been nothing but, really helpful and supportive, and just a fantastic group to work with, top notch in terms of just professionalism and production and everything else. Amazing color analysts, and everyone I've worked with has been fantastic. But that has been a transition for me too, where it's like, I've been working hard and to try and get something out of it, like thinking that I have, the confidence to be able to put myself out there like that. It took a long time too. I thought, I'm not ready yet. I haven't done this. Maybe after the next job is when I'll really try and put myself out there. And that's when I had to have a different change in mentality too, that like, I, deserve this and I have worked hard for it, and still have to tell myself that sometimes, because again, just like with broadcasting itself, it still is a long journey. I'm very far from where, my dreams are.
And if you don't mind, what are some of those dreams that you would like to achieve?
Oh, I mean, I have a great family at WCCO Radio, and they could not have been more supportive to me. But my dream has always been to just do sports broadcasting full time. Really be able to make that traveling and doing games. And it's not glamorous. It's certainly a grind. But it is one that I would love to be, the entirety of my salary. And I don't know really what form that takes. There's always kind of the team route. There's also just there's the network route. There is the cobbling together enough so you can live with whatever jobs you get route. So I don't know what form that will take, but I'm extremely happy with what I'm doing right now. And like I talked about in the beginning, how important my role is as a journalist is, I think, something that makes me a little bit different as a play-by-play broadcaster, and being able to evaluate different situations, being able to approach and talk about sensitive and hard things, I think, is another thing that reporting has taught me. But yeah, I don't mean to be like non-specific, but that's really that's what the goal has been since I graduated college, is this is going to be how I make my living.
And it's okay if you're not too specific, because you never know. It could be BTN this year. Who knows? You might end up on Pac-12 Network, ESPN, NBCSN. So, why put yourself in that box when you don't know exactly where life's going to take you yet?
Yeah, that's the thing, is like there is a lot of different ways that people are able to do this, and whatever way I'm able to work out, I'm open to anything. You're right.
Now, I guess this is a two-part question in the same vicinity, but as an athlete, you were a basketball and swimming crossover athlete, if my research
Yeah,
is right.
I swam a little bit in high school. I mean, swimming, that's going a ways back. I mean, I also like was a horseback rider too, but that's going back way far, Mike.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is, as an athlete, what would you say was the most exciting moment and the most embarrassing moment?
Oh gosh, I didn't have a lot of exciting moments, to be honest. I think part of the
Oh,
reason
come on.
I I was really not on a lot of teams that won. I gotta say, in high school especially, like I was our leading scorer and team MVP our junior and senior years, but we really never won. I think our best, like we might have been a 500 team one of those years. I did a little bit of scoring in those 2 years, so I think that was fun because the confidence you feel to be able to just get the ball, to want the ball and to be able to put it in and think that you're going to do that and play that major role on your team, that was really exciting. But I had a lot of fun with AAU for sure, because we did win games, and I played with two amazing point guards who one went on to D2, one went on to D1. And I mean, to me, it's really like those relationships, growing up and being able to have the freedom to just play basketball during my summers, and the friendships that I made that still continue today. Actually, one of my teammates from AAU moved here, so we still see each other. And I mean, it's been what, 15, 16 years since we've played together on the basketball court. So I think keeping those relationships, that's probably been the best thing about my playing career, has been people who I still keep in touch with and have always had a lot of respect for. And I think it showed me what goes into being a good, girl athlete. I saw Division I players who I was in awe of. And then, they didn't go on to the WNBA. So just think about what it's like to even be a WNBA player, to even be drafted. So that's, I think, some of my best memories. Most embarrassing, I think, I don't know. I mean, I definitely remember this, because don't we all hang on to our like worst moments? You just like wake up in the morning, you're like, remember that time when I was 15 and I airballed a shot from the free throw line? So that was probably it. I was like pretty wide open, airballed it from probably like my heels were on the free throw line, and it went out of bounds. And the old like looking at my hands like, man, what happened there? So it could have been worse, but that was a pretty close-in shot to airball.
I've had a few basketball players on. I went to Harrington recently, and they say the common theme seems to be airballing it, either free throws or shots. And I get it. You have people watching you, and you know what you have to do. And like you said, you release the shot, and then it sails above the backboard or out of bounds. And I could see why you're going, did that just happen?
Yeah, I guess I just got to say, like, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
What would you suggest to aspiring broadcasters? You spoke of how you want to make this full time, but you might have to put together a few different jobs or gigs or assignments to make that work. It's not the easiest field to break into. There's only so many openings out there. But for those who are looking to, I don't want to say be the next Sloane Martin, but to perhaps blaze some trails the way you have, what would you offer to them?
I would think to be patient and to be realistic and to find a voice who you trust. So by that, I mean that this isn't, glamorous. And like, you talk about me, but to me, I still feel like I'm a long way. Like I have a long way to go. And, I've been grinding at this for, 10 plus years now. I started out, and this is what I would say too, is like, you have to start low, whether that's like minor league baseball. I was doing short season single A, getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, having, fertilizer smell drifting through the press box because I was out in the middle of nowhere, carrying my equipment through blizzards, trying to find rural high school gyms. Like we all have these stories and there's a reason for it. So whether it's minor league baseball, getting paid, I mean, I assume it's still terrible, $500 a month for 70 hours a week plus of work. It's a grind. And there are certain people who are able to, be able to get their foot in the door, but there are a lot of people who are just grinding away, and that's what it is. And I feel like I've been lucky to be able to make my living still broadcasting and still doing something that I take a lot of enjoyment in. But for some people, you may not. You may have to make your living in some other kind of way for a long time, because it takes a long time. I am evidence of, be able to make that your full-time salary. So that's part of the being patient. Working or living in the middle of nowhere was not my favorite thing, but it was so completely necessary to get me to where I am right now. I think being realistic too, because this is totally a fun thing you can do on the side. And if I don't go any farther than this, then that will be absolutely fantastic. And I will still feel really great about that. And I think, but if you are really committed, I mean, if you're moving to some, small town, minor league baseball city and you're getting paid barely anything, and then you find yourself at, 27 or 28 or something, and you're not really where you want to be. I don't want other people to find themselves, in that situation. Maybe they still had fun, but, maybe there's a sense of, that lost time or regret for that investment. So I think also being really realistic about what your ceiling can be. And I think also the third one was finding a voice that you can trust. That was a big one for me, because you're going to come across, to be quite honest, professors or other producers that you maybe don't trust their sound, where maybe they're trying their ear, I should say. They're trying to give you advice. They're trying to correct things. And you should always be open to what people are saying and to want to get better. But I think you should also be discerning about, this person's, background, their experience, who else have they, been able to have an effect on in their careers, because there's a lot of people who are going to want to give you feedback and things. And I think you need to really be, decisive about who you're going to be listening to and finding that person. So, because you have to listen to people to improve. I think even listening to your own self is difficult in order to critique yourself. So it is those outside voices, to me, that makes such a huge difference. And so I don't say any of this to be discouraging. It is not to say, don't try unless you think you're going to become, a full-time play-by-play person. But I also have seen just a lot of people who I have been friends with or gone to school with who, ended up stepping away after a couple of years, and then they're trying to kind of get their career back on track, kind of thing. So it is a serious decision, I think, to be able to really hardcore pursue this. But obviously, for me, it's been well worth it on this journey. So those are the things, Mike. I don't hope that doesn't sound too, pessimistic or anything, but I think that is just what I've seen over the years, is being realistic, being patient, being realistic, and then also just finding someone you trust. And that's the thing too. And I want to put this out there. Women, please contact me. Especially, if you're interested in play-by-play, please, I always want to hear from people and help people. And that's really important to me.
I didn't feel you were too pessimistic there, because I can attest to some of the very things you spoke of with my own work. And I'm sure a lot of us would love to be higher than where we want to be. But when you mention patience, sometimes you have to wait, or you just have to get ripe enough before the floodgates open, or finding voices too, because there are times when I would call games, especially at the small cable access level, which is like, hey, it's still a game and someone's parents are going to be watching. But there were moments where I wouldn't hear anything from my producers, and I'm wondering, am I doing a good job, or are they just not feeling anything? And they always say, no, you're fine. And so I don't get a whole lot of instruction, which can be concerning for a while, until you realize, well, if they had an issue with what you were saying or doing, they would say something. And so sometimes nothing is the best compliment you can get. So I felt you were spot on. It's not an easy profession to break into where there's a job waiting for you right out of college. Sometimes you really have to grind, and there are a lot of ways you can do it. I've been doing it through my YouTube channel, just building up my profile through my YouTube partnership as a way to get a steady flow of income until the point comes where maybe I'm fortunate enough to get an opportunity like you have.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that it, like what you're talking about, it really does take that patience. And maybe for some people, they really thrive off of not hearing feedback, negative or positive. I know I'm someone who needs like a lot of reinforcement about things. I always want to be hearing from those higher ups, but it absolutely does have to start at, the lowest level. Like, I sometimes talk to people who want to like stay in the Twin Cities, for example, and I'm like, I mean, I hope you can, there are some opportunities maybe for people who are, really brand new and fresh. But I also think about like, maybe there's some station in Western Minnesota who needs a reporter or sales or play-by-play. Like, there's a lot of jobs that pop up like that you may need. I think about how this one small rural newspaper did a story on me broadcasting games, and the picture they used, I am stuffed into the corner of a gym. My desk is a table that set, like, there's a banner on it that says like yearbooks for sale. And that was my surface, and that's when like the newspaper came out to do a story on me. And I was like, that's a hilarious picture to me, because I am literally stuffed into a corner at a tiny table that was just given my way. That was once, just selling yearbooks, and no one took the sign off, like, that's how things start. And that should just be acceptable and normal if that's really the direction you want to go.
Now, at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned Michelle Tafoya, Susie Colbert being influences for you. How cool and surreal is it through your work with the state tournaments or with the Lynx or Big Ten Network that you are now getting to work alongside some notable names in broadcasting and in sports? And who knows, maybe you'll get that chance to do something with Tafoya or Colbert. But for you, how cool is it where you get to work with Mark Parrish or Christy Winters Scott? I think the two of you have done a couple of games for BTN. As a basketball fan, that has to be like living or working with a piece of history.
Yeah, that was a big transition, because I am used to, I had to give up some control, which is hard for me. But it was like, no, but look at who I'm working with. I mean, this is the best for the broadcast. So those are people who make the job so much easier. And, you can really just like, set things up for them, and they will go ahead, and they carry so much. And that's a big difference from, early on in my career, when I didn't always have that level of trust and, with my partner. And now you are able to just completely lean on them. And so that was a transition for sure, but it has been, really spectacular. And, meeting the people who I've met during the Lynx season too, that was one of the best things from last year, really, was meeting different broadcasters and writers even who I'd really looked up to. So all of those things are really positive and do make me really happy and reflect on getting to here.
Now, I'm wondering, we spoke of your admiration. Have you had any stories of people coming up to you, maybe asking for autographs and reacting the same way you did when you got to meet some of the names you had followed as an athlete and as a college student, as a young broadcaster?
Mike, that's really flattering, but the answer is no. Like,
That's okay. That's okay.
Maybe in the years to come, but I think we're a ways from that.
No, that's fine. I think it's nice too that you still get to be human, because I think sometimes folks get caught up in the hoopla, or they forget that we eat the same food and sleep at the same time that everyone else does.
I mean, I always love hearing from listeners. I mean, that's been the best part of this really, especially at Lynx games, who know where I'm at over on my perch near, section 132 or 133 over at Target Center. And, when I was in UB, maybe the best compliment I've ever gotten from a listener was someone who said, I feel like you're talking directly to me. And that was just such a great compliment, because that's what I want this to be. I want it to be like we as an audience and myself are sharing this journey, this really fun game, this experience, this joy that we feel with this team or this sport, and making it kind of casual and relatable to people. So yeah, I mean, talking to fans is fans of the teams and people who listen is always great.
Now, this may be tough to believe, but is there anything about yourself that we haven't touched on that you would like to offer for the audience out there?
Oh gosh. Not sure. I'm like, I mean, I know I don't put like a ton of myself really out there much. For me, social media is still kind of like a professional realm. I'm not really sure what to say. I don't know. Sorry.
No, that's okay, because I'm looking at some of the mementos you have, like that aerodynamics poster or that KC cap, and I know you've made a life out of sports, but
certainly,
if it's not coming to you right away, that's fine.
What you're seeing right here, these are not my guitars. What you're seeing right here is a bunch of media passes from the last WNBA season. This is something that my mother-in-law made me. Of course, they got the UB poster. My dad has a background in automobiles. Like, he's really, he writes about cars a lot. Did go to Kansas City. That's a Lindsay Whalen bobblehead. Hopefully I'm pointing at it right there.
I see it now, yeah.
Go for one. Yeah, I got that last season. Went to the Negro League Museum, which was fantastic. And just for my birthday, I got the biography of Toni Stone from St. Paul, who was the first woman to play in the Negro Leagues. Those are some of my spouse's baseball cards, but you're right. They're definitely a life made of sports. I got a bunch of bobbleheads over here too. But that it's been not just, my relationship, it's been, my whole life and my family life as well, as long as I know.
Well, Sloane, if we get a chance to do this again, I could see the follow-up episode being your history of all these collectibles, and even the glimpses you were offering just now. I can see it. You could turn this into an entire series, your life stories involving all of the jerseys and collectibles that you have, because it sounds like with all of them, you'd have a story to share. And as a sports fan myself, that has to be cool. I just think it's cool you got a chance to visit the Negro League Museum, and that your mother-in-law kept all of those passes for you.
Oh yeah, she's crafty. I am not.
Okay.
So those are part of like really nice gifts that I get. I have huge scrapbooks here that are solely her labor that I would never do, but like completely appreciate. But yeah, it is funny like that. I look around, not just in this room, but like just thinking about like my Maya Jordan poster is, across the hall. Yeah, there's a lot.
Oh, we could have a lot of fun with this. And I have to imagine, as you continue as a broadcaster, who knows how many more items will fill that room of yours.
That's part of it, is like everything has a story. It has a connection to a game, and therefore a connection to an experience. So that is why I end up, keeping a lot of these things around.
Well, Sloane Martin, I appreciate you sharing a lot of stories with us. Where can people find you? I know you're on CCO Radio, but if people are interested in learning more about you, or even reaching out and getting some feedback or taking you up on that offer of getting into broadcasting for other aspiring females, how can they get a hold of you?
Definitely Twitter is going to be the best way. It's just at Sloane Martin. That's Sloane with an E. And that's the easiest way. My DMs are open. And I definitely encourage people when they're trying to get out on this journey to definitely just to reach out and not be nervous about that. There's people who want to help and see the next people come in.
Well, Sloane, thanks again for taking time from your day to share a little oral history about yourself. And hopefully, I don't know when, we'll be able to get back to sports at some point so you and I can get back to our jobs with the Twins and the Lynx and all of the other teams that make our work fun. But I learned a lot about you today, and I'm glad we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Once again, Sloane Martin from CCO Radio, broadcaster for the Minnesota Lynx, and you will see her again when the state tournament championships come back for KSTC 45 and Big Ten Network on the women's college basketball scene. And if you want to be a guest on a future episode of this series, just hit us up at tsbtelevision@gmail.com or social media at the Mike Peden on Twitter and Instagram. That will do it for this edition of Mic'd Up Sports. We'll see you next time.